Hi, welcome to Hillcrest Sermons, growing together.
Show us your heart's delight.
Hey, good morning. It's fun to be back here. Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the moms in the room. The longer that I'm a dad, the more impressed I am with moms. So I can't say enough good things about all moms, even if I don't even know you. Happy Mother's Day. Hope you feel celebrated today. My name is Weston, and I'm here with my family, although they're not actually in the room because they got mad during worship and left. No, they're downstairs. That's them. That's one of my favorite moms, but she's not my mom. That's my wife, Allison, and our girls, Leona and Millie. Leona's 4, about to turn 5, and Millie just turned 3. And yeah, she's sharing with your kids right now, so if they come back with any weird ideas, that's my wife's fault, not mine. But I think that they'll enjoy it. This is home to us in many ways because Allison went to school at Weston, was part of CCF, and I came and did the CCF internship here at Western for 2 years. And so this is where like the bulk of our initial spiritual formation took place, was in this community. And we just really if we could live anywhere in the world, we would live here. But God just hasn't called us to here. So it's good to be back. So thank you to the pastoral team. Thank you to the Hillcrest Missions Corps for having us in. And especially to the UCM staff who has invested in us over the years. It's fun to be back. We just finished our second term in Africa. And it's a joy to live in Africa. A lot of people think that it's all sacrifice. It's not. There's a lot of great things about living there, a lot of subtle nuances to life that you really can't create back here in America. And so when we're gone, those are the things that we tend to miss the most. But it has been good to be back as well. Good to be back, spend a season here celebrating the holidays with our family. Our girls are getting to know their grandparents, which has been a blessing. Our girls have really enjoyed the novelty of playgrounds. That's something new to them. And Allison and I have enjoyed the novelty of Costco, which is something that we miss dearly when we're overseas. So that's been good. We go on dates to Costco. Has anybody else gone on a date to Costco before? Yes, you are our people. We know you. So it's been good. It's been a joy to be back in America, but I don't know if I would necessarily characterize America as joyful in this season. I hope that you do experience a lot of the joy of the Lord in your daily life, but as a society, I'm not sure that's the best word to describe us. There have been a lot of divisive issues that have taken place over the last few years. Since we left this soil last in 2019, a lot has happened, and you have gone through it, and so maybe you don't see it all as one big chunk like we do, but we watched it from afar and experienced it in other places. So in the last 4 years, you've gone through, of course, the pandemic, but you've also gone through like a presidential impeachment process and a presidential election, and those are divisive, heavy things. When we left, George Floyd was still alive. We had no war in Ukraine. There was no January 6th committee. Roe versus Wade had not been overturned. So all that has happened in just a really short amount of time. And I think it's been heavy, and it kind of weighs on our culture, doesn't it? And so I think we need a little bit of levity in life sometimes. Do you agree? Okay. So my hope is that we can laugh today. Is that all right? Good deal. One of my not-so-serious hobbies is collecting photos of unintentionally humorous African signage, okay? We're missionaries to Malawi, and we partner with an organization called the Malawi Assemblies of God. And I tell you that because Malawi has a nickname. It's called the Warm Heart of Africa, and it's an apt, beautiful nickname to describe the country. But I'm rebranding Malawi. I think I was put in charge of that. And so I'm going to go ahead and change that nickname and call it the Land of Unfortunate Abbreviations. Because as you drive around our country and you come across our partner churches, you'll often see their signs out front that look a lot like this. A little bit awkward, but It was actually becoming such a common thing that the churches were doing this, that the national church leadership had to send out a memo, and they're like, pastors, please stop abbreviating your signs. They're like, we know it saves space, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. So being Africa, paint's expensive, churches don't have a lot. They're not going to go out and they're just going to repaint their signs. So what the common solution was to go in and just write Embleys in underneath here, which did not solve the problem. Much to my pleasure, I can still drive around the country and see these signs today. So I think the truth is you can learn a lot about a culture by paying attention to its signs. And so as we go along today, I want to share some pictures of my favorites, and hopefully you'll laugh, but hopefully you'll also get an idea of what life in Malawi is like, why we're excited about being there and really passionate about for what God's going to do in the future. Now, I think something that we've seen here over the last few years is that we Americans have this nasty little habit of demanding that everybody else look like me and think like me and act like me, right? Now, we would never admit that, I understand. In fact, we even have phrases built into our vernacular to protect us against that accusation, right? We'll say things like, you do you, which we don't mean, right? We don't mean you do you. What we mean is you do you as long as I like you. But if I don't like you, for goodness sake, please do not do you, right? Do anybody else but you. And so we tout diversity, but we cherish homogeneity. And the irony, of course, is that God didn't create humanity to be homogeneous. So we're kind of working against nature here. It's not a political statement. It's just the reality. God is the most creative mind in all of existence. And not only did he create humanity with all of its countless variations, but I think he actually likes them. I think that he actually intends that everybody, all the variations he created in people, that we would have the opportunity to come into his kingdom and not have to conform in order to get in, right? And so many of the things that make us different are actually a beautiful part of God's plan. And if we want to bring heaven to earth, and that's our mandate, right? If we want to bring heaven to earth, then we need to learn how to love our fellow man. We need to learn how to stand with him or her before the throne of the one who gave us those differences, and not just worry about what the person next to you needs to change, right? And so a silly example of learning to live with humanity's differences from our context, Malawi, the official national language is English, but it's not widely spoken. Chichewa is the primary spoken language, and fortunately for us, Chichewa shares much of the same alphabet as English, with a few particularities. In Chichewa, the letter R and the letter L are interchangeable. You can use them for each other however you want, or if you don't want to, you don't have to. And this carries over into their use of English as well. And it can get a little bit confusing, especially when you run across businesses like this one. What? This is just an agricultural wholesale shop. I don't know what you're reading. No, but if you are the kind of person who needs to stick to your grammar guns, okay, and you insist that an R is an R and an L is an L, no matter where in the world you happen to find yourself, you're going to cast some shade on these poor people, aren't you? They're just trying to eke out a living. And we laugh because misunderstanding based in cultural ignorance is a common thing. But it's not just cross-cultural problem. It's very present, I think, in our own society, and a society that is made up of increasingly divergent cultures. And I'm not talking about ethnic cultures. I'm talking about ideological ones. I think it's very possible that there are more differing worldviews today than ever before in the history of the earth. And in an attempt to wrap our minds around all of it, we start classifying, right? And we start lumping people into groups, and then we develop kind of like this one-size-fits-all solution to deal with this group, and then a different one to deal with that group. And yet we live in a time where people have never wanted to be grouped less than they do today. And so whether or not that's the right or wrong question isn't the question, okay? The real question we have to ask ourselves is, do we do the hard work of seeking to understand the true issues and desires and the true fears that underlie the problems we see? Do we do the hard work of listening and asking questions without already having to have our agenda in place? I think most commonly the answer is, unfortunately, no. It's a lot easier to prescribe medication than it is to diagnose an illness. And this has been the case in Africa for a long time. For centuries now, the outside world has looked upon Africa with a lot of pity and tried to fix all of its problems with outside solutions. But rather than getting to the root of the culture and finding solutions that make sense in Africa, those solutions have often ended up creating additional problems, backfiring. And so the one-size-fits-all approach to diplomacy and to charity and to economic development in many ways has created more problems than it's solved. And now, fortunately, God doesn't take a one-size-fits-all approach with us, right? In Matthew chapter 10, verse 30, Jesus even tells us that God knows us intimately and he cares for us personally. And he says it kind of cryptically. He says this, he says, even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Which for some of you is not super impressive. But, hey, I say, yeah, I hear that. Hey, I just made enemies. It's good. But for many of you, it's like, wow, like God knows every single hair on your head. So what? So he says, don't be afraid. Well, Jesus, what are you getting at? He's saying, God has looked into your eyes. He's registered your tears. He's aware of your cares, your longings, your fears. He knows you better than you know you because you're valuable to him. And so he handcrafts his love. He customizes his love for you. And I think a lot of times we think that because God loves all people equally, that he loves us all the same. But I would say that's not true because I have 2 little girls, okay? And my 3-year-old Millie, she gets a thrill out of being tossed around. I mean, you can tackle her, you can roughhouse with her, you can throw her over your shoulder like a continental soldier, and she will laugh, and she'll be like, more, Daddy, more, Daddy, more. If I do the same thing to my 4-year-old, Leona, she hates it. And when she loses control of her body, she gets all tense and freezes up. And so I learned that, while roughhousing with Millie tells her that Daddy loves her, roughhousing with Leona tells her that Daddy is a cruel sadist who cannot be trusted. Okay? So we know that God's love for all people is equal, yes, but it's not generic. It's specific. It's specific to you. It's specific to me. And so when we go to show our love for other people, we got to show them a love that they understand, right? I think I would say if they don't get it, if they don't comprehend our actions as loving, we even have to ask the question, did we really love them at all? And I know that the implication is that that means every relationship in our lives requires something different of us. And it's a lot of work, but it's so, so important if we're going to love people well. And so the fancy word for all this is contextualization. My definition for contextualization is very simple. It's just making things make sense to people, okay? But we can't make things make sense to people until we understand those people. And so I want to walk through a story in Scripture today in the book of Acts, chapter 17. You heard it read already. And Paul is in Athens, and Paul notices a disturbing trend. It says that he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So what does he do? So he reasoned on Facebook and in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. Now, I think this is Paul's first failure here, okay? I think what he did is he comes in and he sees a problem and he immediately thinks, I know what to do. I'll tell them why they're wrong. People love to know when they're wrong. Like, did Paul ask why the city was full of idols? Did he try to figure out maybe where these people were coming from? No, he just goes straight to the comment section and he lays into them, right? And so, unsurprisingly, he gets some pushback. A group of philosophers began to dispute with him. Some of them even asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" And then they pull him off to the side and they're like, "Paul, let's try this again," right? Like, what's this new teaching that you're presenting? Like, you're bringing strange ideas to our ears. In other words, they don't fit inside of our worldview. But we would like to know what they mean, so can you help us out a little bit? I think this is so relatable to modern people like us, right? Because like Paul, people today are always just going off on anybody who doesn't share their beliefs or their convictions, when those people don't even have a context for those arguments, right? And I think that's what clicks for Paul in this moment. I think he seems to realize that like all of this arguing and debating that he's doing, it's not getting anywhere. And so he makes a brilliant course correction. And he takes a step back and a deep breath, and he just starts making things make sense. And here's what he says. He says this: "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." Now, this is an accurate observation, okay? It's also a complimentary one. And I'm not sure you would feel flattered if someone came up to you and was like, "Hey, you're really religious," you know? But this is a place and time where people wanted to be seen as religious. This is what these guys did all day. They debated ideas, philosophical ideas. And so this was a compliment. He says, "For as I walked around and I looked carefully at your objects of worship," in other words, I've paid attention to what you give attention to, "I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Now, what you worship as something unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you." I think this is deeply contextualized, gospel-centric relationship. I think Paul does three things here, three things that we can do, no matter who we're engaged with, no matter what worldview they hold, but three things that will open the door to relationship rather than slamming it shut, which is what so commonly happens with us, right? So let's look at those three things really quickly. First thing that Paul does is he starts with a genuine affirmation, right? And this is a compliment. It's just not rocket science. He just builds positive sentiment, and you know what that does for him? It gains him some trust. I think everybody in our world today could use a little more love and a little less attack. Do you agree? We need to start building trust through being able to see the good in other people. And then calling it out. Even if it's someone that we share nothing else in common with, we can still see good in them and then call it out. Affirmation is the seed of trust, from which trust will sprout. The second thing that Paul does is that he shows off his big ears. He demonstrates that he's not just interested in being heard, but in actually getting to know these people. Again, I think the reason people are so skeptical of one another today is that they're expecting to get a sales pitch. They're expecting to get a sermon. They expect to get a scolding. What they want is to be heard. And as Jesus followers, we also need to have big ears like this. We really need to start listening to learn rather than to respond. Paul puts that in practice. And then, and only then, after having built some trust and displayed open-mindedness, does Paul seize his opportunity. But he doesn't just check the boxes, tick, tick, and then say, "Okay, sit down, shut up, it's my turn, listen," right? No, he takes the intel, what he has learned, and he brilliantly crafts it to their experience. And here's essentially what he's saying. He's saying, an altar to an unknown God. You are so wise to acknowledge that you don't know everything. Truth must be so important to you. He creates this hunger in them, and then he just fills in the missing pieces that they're already hungering for. And so in 3 sentences, Paul goes from being an ideological threat to being a comrade, all because he chose to make things make sense. So we need to follow Paul's lead as well if we want to do anything other than continue to babble. And in our lives, Allison and I are keenly aware that we are not love experts. We're not naturally inclined towards perfect expressions of love. But out of love, we're deeply committed to loving in appropriate ways. And so for us, that means everything we do in Africa needs to be done in partnership and designed in partnership with Africans. Everything we do in Africa needs to be reproducible by Africans, which means it's done in the African way. Everything we do needs to be accessible and affordable. And it needs to be founded in the African expression of biblical principles. And so I came to Jesus through campus ministry, through CCF's sister ministry at WSU. And where he saved me is where I have a passion to reach others. And so as many of you know, God has called us to plant discipleship movements on Africa's secular university campuses. We have such an opportunity in Africa to influence the future for the kingdom of heaven. University is such a rare feat for Malawians. The few graduates who come out on the other side are immediately endowed with authority in the social hierarchy. In many senses, these students were kind of like predestined for leadership. And if Jesus, if he can transform their lives now, then he can guide their leadership forever. African nations are just ransacked by corruptions. And in my opinion, corruption is the primary driving force behind every social ill that Africa faces. But if God can change the culture of leadership in Malawi, then he can restore the dignity of corruption's many, many victims. People, marginalized people who will never have the opportunity to taste the benefits of power. So it's a powerful long-term vision to be on campus and to affect the future in that way. But as we live day to day, surrounded by such profound poverty and suffering, we also started asking the question, how can we make maybe a more immediate impact while not abandoning this long view of campus ministry? And so I want to tell you a little bit about a new initiative that my wife Allison is heading up in Malawi. And I'll introduce it with the next sign. Let's see. Oh, wait, not that one. There should be there we go, yes. Here you go. All right. You have to forgive the photo taking. I was driving and taking pictures at the same time at 120 kilometers an hour. So that's why it's crooked. But this is a sign, if you can't read it, with an arrow pointing to the side of the road, indicating the open defecation free zone. Okay. Now this zone is startling to me. Not so much in what it promotes, because I'm all for it, okay? But really what it indicates about all the other zones, okay? It'll make you stop and check the bottom of your boots, for sure. But open defecation is actually very common in Malawi. Why wouldn't it be? There's no public restrooms. How many of you have needed a public restroom in your life, right? So when you gotta go, you gotta go. You can't really blame people for that. The problem is that poverty has created this lack of sanitation. A lack of sanitation leads to the spread of disease, and the spread of disease, of course, deepens poverty. So it's a vicious cycle, and there's a lot of vicious cycles like this in Africa and in poor societies in general. And another one of these vicious poverty-driven cycles is food security. Malawi is a subsistence farming country. That just means that every family is growing what they need to feed their family for the coming year. But most families aren't able to grow enough. Because over the years, poor farming practices have been imported from abroad. Those practices have become standardized, and they totally don't jive with the African context. And so they're insufficient, they're inefficient, and they create food scarcity, food shortages. And my wife, Allison, has a huge heart for seeing Malawians bring nutrition into their families, for bringing transformation to their communities, and Jesus into their relationships. And so over the past few years, she's just poured herself into trainings in discipleship-based sustainable agriculture models that have been proven to increase crop yields and to allow for wider, greater nutrition. And the thing is we don't want to import another failed solution, right? And so the beauty of these methods is that they're not imported. They're developed in Africa by Africans for Africa, in cooperation, though, with God and with the way he's created the earth to work. And so we only use means and materials that are available and abundant to every member of society, even the poorest, because really it only makes sense, again, if it makes sense to them. And the results have been astonishing so far. In places where the foundations method is being used, maize yields, maize is a staple crop, maize yields has been shown to increase by 800%. And that's amazing because what it means is that farmers can use this extra land that they have now to grow a wider variety of crops to supplement nutrition, because maize is, not super nutritious. More crops. They can also grow extra maize that they can take to market, sell, begin to generate an income, and begin to dig their family step by step, not just out of hunger, but out of poverty entirely. And so God has inspired us to start a demonstration farm on a plot of land near our house. It's going to be a center where people can come, they can learn the methods, they can see the foundations methods side by side with the traditional methods, and they really are quite starkly different. And then they can be empowered with this knowledge, and they can take it back to their communities, implement it in their own lives, and begin to spread it. The best part is that the gospel is core to the method. So as these villages are beginning to see the blessing of increased crop yields, they're also understanding that it's God who's calling them to work in partnership with him, in harmony with him, not just in their land practices, but in every aspect of their lives. And so we're incredibly excited about what lies ahead. This is the team of guys that Allison is training to lead this ministry. And it may be Allison's ministry, but I get goosebumps talking about it. I think it's really cool. So Hillcrest Church, thank you for making things like this happen. I don't know if you fully comprehend, but it's people here standing in solidarity with us way over there that make this possible, make it happen. So one of the most encouraging things that we hear is when we send out a monthly newsletter via email and somebody just responds with a prayer or thanking God with us for the things that he's doing in Malawi. It kind of fuels us and keeps us going. So if you want to stay up to date on what God is doing over there, we'd love to send that newsletter to you. You can just fill out one of these cards at the table in the back with your email address, and we'll just send that to you every month. We also have prayer cards that you can take with you. And last but not least, who's hungry today? I hope the moms came hungry because we brought an African delicacy for you today. We have roasted crickets. Might be the best thing you eat all morning. So we have roasted crickets for you. You can challenge your friends, your pastors to an eating competition. That'll be great. You just have to get back there fast because my girls have already eaten half of them. Okay, so get there quickly. But it's been great to be back in Bellingham today and be with you this morning. So thank you. Let me pray for you, and then I'll be finished here. Jesus, thank you so much for this church, the impact that it's had on my life, on Allison's lives. We know that our experience here is only multiplied by the hundreds and thousands, and that this church has touched every corner of the world. I just thank you for that culture that's been created of loving missions, loving the world, and would you just cause it to be perpetuated into the future? Would that culture be caught by every single person that steps foot into this place? God, thank you. Bless the moms today as they are celebrated. Help us to celebrate them well. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Thanks for listening. For more info, visit hcbellingham.com and join us any Sunday, 9 and 11 a.m.